It was 2 a.m. on a silent Tuesday in September 2012 when the police in Rock Hill, South Carolina received a frantic call from a woman whispering into her phone. She told the dispatcher that she was currently hiding in her bedroom closet behind a row of winter coats because she could hear someone walking around in her kitchen. The dispatcher told her to stay on the line and that officers were 2 minutes away. When the police arrived, they surrounded the small single-story bungalow and kicked in the front door, guns drawn, ready to confront an intruder. They swept the house, moving room by room, clearing the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, and finally the bedroom where the terrified woman was still huddled in her closet. But when the officers signaled that the coast was clear, they had a confusing update for her. There was nobody in the house. The back door was locked and bolted from the inside, the front door had been locked until the police kicked it in, and all the windows were painted shut and secured with security bars. The police told the woman, "Look, you probably just heard the house settling or maybe a tree branch hitting the roof. There is absolutely no physical way anyone entered or exited this property in the last 20 minutes without us seeing them or without breaking a lock." The woman tried to argue. She told them she knew what she heard. She heard heavy footsteps. She heard the refrigerator open. She heard breathing. But without a suspect, the police filed a report and left, leaving the woman alone in the house again. But the woman was right. Someone was in the house, and as she watched the taillights of the police cruisers fade away down the street, the man she had been so afraid of wasn't running away through the backyard. He was lying perfectly still on his stomach in the crawl space directly above her head, looking down at her through a gap in the ventilation duct, holding his breath and smiling. This story is a terrifying example of how our homes, which are supposed to be our sanctuaries, can become our prisons, and how the most dangerous threat isn't always the one trying to break in, it's the one that is already inside. If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you have come to the right place, because that is all we do, and we upload every single day. So if that is of interest to you, please invite the like button to a relaxing meditation retreat, but replace the soothing sounds of nature with a recording of a mosquito buzzing in their ear for 4 hours straight. Also, please subscribe to the Cipher Story on YouTube so you do not miss any of our uploads. Okay, let us get into today's story. Tracy Reynolds was a 26-year-old graphic designer who had spent the last 2 years of her life living in a state of constant anxiety. She had recently ended a tumultuous and frightening relationship with a man named Patrick. Patrick was the definition of toxic. At the beginning of their relationship, he was charming and attentive, but that attention quickly morphed into obsession. He would text her 50 times a day, demand to know where she was at all times, and show up at her workplace unannounced just to check on her. When Tracy finally worked up the courage to break up with him, Patrick did not take it well. He made threats, he slashed her tires, and he would park his car down the street from her apartment, just watching her. Eventually, Tracy got a restraining order and decided she needed a fresh start. She needed to get away from the city, away from the memories, and away from Patrick. So she moved about 40 miles south to the quiet town of Rock Hill, South Carolina. She found a cute little rental house, a bungalow built in the 1950s that sat on a large lot with big oak trees. It was perfect. It was secluded enough to be peaceful, but close enough to neighbors that she didn't feel isolated. The house had hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, and a long hallway that ran down the center of the house, connecting the bedrooms. Unlike her old apartment, this place felt solid. It felt safe. Tracy moved in on September 1st, and for the first couple of weeks, everything was bliss. She set up her home office in the spare bedroom. She put heavy curtains on the windows for privacy, and she finally started to feel her shoulders relax. She hadn't seen Patrick in months, and she hadn't received any strange texts or calls. She thought she had finally escaped him. But then, the noises started. It began subtly at first, usually around 11 p.m., just as Tracy was winding down for bed. Turning off the TV and getting ready to read, she would hear a sound coming from the ceiling. It sounded like a soft thump, followed by a dragging noise. Tracy tried to rationalize it. The house was old. Older houses make noise. Wood expands and contracts in the heat. Pipes rattle. Maybe it was squirrels or raccoons running across the roof. She called her landlord, a nice, older guy named Mr. Henderson, and asked him if there had been any issues with pests in the attic previously. Mr. Henderson assured her that the house had been inspected before she moved in, and it was clean, but he promised to come by and take a look. A few days later, he walked around the perimeter of the house, looking for entry points in the eaves or the roof vents. "Everything looks tight, Tracy," he told her. "It's probably just branches hitting the shingles. I'll trim the trees back next week." Tracy felt a little better, but the noises didn't stop. In fact, they got more distinct. About a week later, Tracy was in the shower, washing her hair, when she heard a sound that made her freeze under the hot water. It was the distinct squeak of a floorboard directly above the bathroom. Now, this house was a single story. There was no second floor above the bathroom. There was only the attic. And the attic wasn't a finished room. It was an unfinished crawl space filled with pink fiberglass insulation and darkness. The only way to get into the attic was through a small square hatch in the ceiling of the hallway closet. Tracy turned off the water and stood there dripping, listening intently. Squeak. Creak. It sounded rhythmic, like footsteps, someone pacing back and forth. Tracy grabbed her towel, wrapped it around herself, and ran out of the bathroom, locking the door behind her. She grabbed her phone and called her dad. Her dad lived 2 hours away, but he was the only person she trusted with her fears about Patrick. "Dad, I think someone is on the roof, or in the attic," she whispered. Her dad tried to calm her down. "Trace, sounds carry in weird ways in old houses. If it was a person, they would have fallen through the ceiling joists. It's probably a possum. I'll come down this weekend and take a look myself." Tracy spent that night sleeping on the couch with all the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife. Whenever she heard a creak, she would jolt awake, heart pounding, scanning the room, but nothing happened. When her dad came down that weekend, he brought a heavy-duty flashlight and a ladder. He set the ladder up in the hallway, opened the closet door, and pushed open the attic hatch. Tracy stood at the bottom of the ladder, holding her breath. Her dad climbed up, his head disappearing into the dark hole. "Hello?" he called out, his voice muffled by the insulation. "Anyone up here?" Tracy waited, bracing herself for a scream or the sound of a struggle, but after a few minutes, her dad climbed back down, brushing dust off his shoulders. "Honey, there's nothing up there," he said. "It's just insulation and dust. There are no footprints, no signs of an animal, no nest, nothing. It's empty." Tracy felt a wave of relief, but also confusion. "But I heard walking, Dad, I swear." "I believe you heard something," he said. "But sound travels. Maybe it's the pipes knocking or the house settling. I checked the vents. They are all screened off. Nothing can get in." Tracy tried to let it go. She told herself she was just paranoid, that the trauma from Patrick had made her hyper-aware of every little sound. She went back to her routine, focusing on her work and trying to enjoy her new home. But then the physical disturbances began. It started with small things that made Tracy question her memory. One morning she walked into the kitchen to make coffee, and she noticed that the cabinet door where she kept her mugs was wide open. Tracy was a neat freak. She lived alone. She knew she closed her cabinets. She stared at the open door, feeling a prickle of unease. She closed it, telling herself she must have left it open when she got a glass of water in the middle of the night. 2 days later, she came home from grocery shopping and found the toilet seat in the bathroom was up. Tracy was a woman living alone. There was absolutely no reason for the toilet seat to ever be up. She stood in the bathroom doorway, staring at the porcelain rim, feeling a cold dread wash over her. This wasn't the house settling. This was a human act. She immediately thought of Patrick. Had he found her? Had he made a copy of her key somehow? Was he gaslighting her, coming in while she was gone just to mess with things, to let her know he was there without actually hurting her? Tracy went into full defense mode. She went to the hardware store and bought brand new heavy-duty locks for the front and back doors. She installed them herself, making sure they were secure. She also bought window locks and dowel rods to place in the tracks of the windows so they couldn't be slid open from the outside. That night, she lay in bed feeling a little safer. She had the only keys to the house. Nobody could get in unless they broke a window, and if they did that, she would hear it. At around 3 a.m., she woke up to a smell. Tracy didn't smoke, and she didn't allow smoking in her house, but as she lay there in the dark, she smelled the faint, distinct odor of stale cigarette smoke mixed with something else, something sour, like unwashed body odor. She sat up in bed, sniffing the air. The smell seemed to be coming from the hallway. She got up, grabbed her baseball bat, she had upgraded from the knife, and walked into the hall. "Who is there?" she yelled, trying to sound tough. "I have a gun and I called the police." Silence, just the hum of the refrigerator. She walked down the hall, sniffing. The smell got stronger near the closet where the attic hatch was located. She looked up at the ceiling. The hatch was closed tight. She reached up and touched the door handle of the closet. It was locked. She had started locking the closet door at night, just in case. Tracy checked the front door, locked. She checked the back door, locked. Nothing had been disturbed. She went back to bed, telling herself maybe the smell was coming from outside. Maybe a neighbor was smoking on their porch and it drifted in through a vent. But the next morning, the escalation reached a new level. Tracy went into the kitchen and found an empty soda can sitting on the counter. It was a brand of soda she didn't drink. She drank Diet Coke. This was a can of Mountain Dew. She didn't buy Mountain Dew. She didn't have any guests. Tracy stared at the can, trembling. She picked it up using a paper towel. It was empty, crushed slightly on the side. This was proof, undeniable proof, that someone had been in her kitchen. She wasn't crazy. The noises, the open cabinets, the toilet seat, the smell, it was all real. She called the police immediately. This brings us back to the moment I described at the beginning. The police arrived, swept the house, and found nothing. They checked the new locks, no signs of forced entry. They checked the windows, all secure. They even walked around the outside of the house looking for footprints in the mud, but found nothing. The officer looked at Tracy with a mix of pity and skepticism. "Ma'am, is it possible you bought this soda and forgot? Or maybe a friend came over?" "I don't have friends here yet," Tracy cried. "I moved here to be alone. Someone is getting in." "Look," the officer said, "if someone was getting in, they would have to have a key, or they would have to break something. You have brand new locks. Maybe you should get a security camera just for your own peace of mind." The police left, and Tracy felt truly alone. She felt like she was in a horror movie where the protagonist knows the monster is real, but nobody believes her. She decided to take the officer's advice. She went to Best Buy that afternoon and bought a high-end nanny cam, a small camera that could be hidden on a shelf and connected to her phone via Wi-Fi. She set the camera up in the living room facing the hallway so it would catch anyone coming from the front door, the back door, or the bedrooms. She also set up a second camera in the kitchen. She connected them to her phone, tested the motion detection, and waited. That night, Tracy didn't sleep. She lay in bed with her phone on her chest, watching the live feed from the cameras. The house was dark on the screen, illuminated by the camera's night vision. Hours passed. Nothing moved. The house was silent. Around 4 a.m., exhaustion finally overtook her, and she dozed off. She woke up at 7 a.m. to the sun streaming through the curtains. She grabbed her phone immediately and checked the app. No motion events detected. Tracy let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Maybe the police were right. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Maybe she drank the soda in a fugue state brought on by stress. She got up, walked into the kitchen, and froze. On the kitchen table, directly in the center of the placemat, was the knife she had kept by her bed the night before. She had left it on her nightstand. She knew she had, but now it was in the kitchen, and next to the knife was a crude drawing on a napkin, drawn in red marker. It was a drawing of a stick-figure woman sleeping in a bed with X's over her eyes. Tracy didn't scream. She couldn't. The fear was so intense it choked her. She grabbed her keys and her purse and ran out of the house. She didn't even put on shoes. She just ran to her car and drove to the police station. She showed them the drawing. She showed them the knife. She told them about the cameras not picking anything up. The police took it seriously this time. A threat was a threat. They sent a detective back to the house with her. They reviewed the camera footage together, and this is where the mystery deepened. The camera in the living room covered the hallway entrance. The camera in the kitchen covered the back door. Neither camera picked up any movement all night. Tracy had scrubbed through the footage minute by minute. Nothing. But somehow, someone had walked from the bedroom to the kitchen carrying a knife and drawn a picture without triggering the motion sensors. "It's like a ghost," Tracy whispered. The detective shook his head. "Ghosts don't draw pictures, Tracy. Someone is bypassing the cameras. Do you have a basement?" "No, just a crawlspace foundation." "What about the attic?" "My dad checked the attic," Tracy said. "It's empty." The detective looked up at the ceiling. "I want to check it again." They walked down the hallway to the closet where the attic hatch was. Tracy stood back, clutching her purse while the detective got a chair from the kitchen. He placed it under the hatch and stood on it. He pushed the square panel up and slid it to the side. "Flashlight," he said, holding his hand down. Tracy handed him the heavy mag light. He shined it into the hole, sweeping the beam left and right. "Clear," he said. "Nobody up here, but—" He paused, leaning further in. "There is a lot of dust up here, but look at this." He pointed the light at the wooden beams closest to the hatch opening. Tracy couldn't see from the floor. "What is it?" "There are drag marks here," the detective said, "like someone has been pulling themselves up and down through this hole, and the insulation, it's packed down in a path leading towards the back of the house over the bedroom." The detective climbed down. "I'm going to call for a team. We need to search that entire attic space properly, not just from the hatch. We need to crawl back there." Tracy felt sick. The attic, the noises she had heard on the first night, the squeaking floorboards above the bathroom. It wasn't the house settling, it wasn't pipes. Within an hour, 2 more officers arrived. They put on Tyvek suits and masks and climbed up into the attic. Tracy waited in the living room, listening to their heavy boots thumping on the ceiling joists, moving slowly towards the back corner of the house, the corner directly above her bedroom. Suddenly, the thumping stopped. "Hey, Sarge!" one of the officers yelled from the attic, his voice muffled but urgent. "You need to see this now!" The detective, who was standing with Tracy, looked at her. "Stay here," and ran to the hallway, climbing up the ladder. Tracy stood alone in the living room, staring at the dark square hole in the ceiling. She heard mumbling from above, then the crackle of a radio, then the detective's voice. "Jesus Christ, how long has she lived here?" A moment later, the detective climbed down. His face was pale. He looked at Tracy and said, "Tracy, you need to come outside with me right now. Do not ask questions, just walk out the door." Tracy followed him onto the front lawn, into the bright sunlight. "What is it?" she asked. "Did you find him?" "We found where he's been living," the detective said. "He's not up there right now, but Tracy, he has been up there a long time." The detective pulled out his phone and showed her a picture he had just taken inside her attic. The photo on the detective's phone was a grainy, flashlit image of a corner of the attic that was tucked behind the main chimney stack. It showed a makeshift bed, but it wasn't made of blankets or a mattress. It was made of Tracy's own clothes. Pile after pile of her sweaters, her winter coats, and her towels had been dragged up there and arranged into a nest. In the center of the nest was a sleeping bag that looked ancient and filthy. Surrounding the bed were dozens of empty food wrappers, protein bars, jerky, and empty water bottles. But the most disturbing detail in the photo were the jars lined up against the wooden beam, 5 mason jars filled with a dark yellow liquid. The man had been using them as a toilet, so he wouldn't have to come down to use the bathroom. Tracy covered her mouth, holding back a scream of pure violation. "Are those my clothes?" she stammered. "Yes," the detective said, his face grim. "And Tracy, there is something else you need to know about the vents." He swiped to the next photo. It was a close-up of the backside of the bathroom ventilation fan. Normally, these fans are boxed in, but the metal housing on this one had been pried open and bent back, creating a direct line of sight from the attic down into the bathroom shower. The detective explained that they found similar modifications above her bedroom, specifically directly above her bed. Small holes had been drilled through the drywall, barely the size of a pinhead from below, but from above they were viewing ports. Tracy felt her knees give out. She grabbed the hood of the police cruiser to steady herself. The realization hit her like a physical blow. For 2 weeks, she had felt safe inside her locked house. She had walked around in her towel. She had slept in her bed. She had lived her private life thinking she was alone. But the whole time, just a few feet above her head, lying on a bed of her own stolen clothes, a man had been watching her every move, breathing in the same air, living in her ceiling like a parasite. "You said he isn't up there," Tracy said, her voice trembling. "So where is he?" "We think he must have slipped out when you went to the police station," the detective said. "He probably heard you leave, saw the opportunity, and ran. But we have units searching the neighborhood right now. We have his scent, dogs are on the way. We will find him." But the detective was wrong. The man hadn't left. While the detective was comforting Tracy on the front lawn, the 2 officers were still inside the attic, finishing their sweep of the evidence. One of the officers, Officer Miller, was crawling on his hands and knees near the far edge of the attic, where the roof line meets the floor, strictly looking for any more weapons or stolen items. The attic was scorching hot. It was South Carolina in September, and the heat radiating off the roof shingles made the air inside the crawl space over 100 degrees. Sweat was pouring down Miller's face, stinging his eyes. Miller reached a section of the attic that was filled with deep piles of pink fiberglass insulation, the fluffy cotton candy-looking stuff that keeps a house warm. Usually, this stuff is laid out in flat rolls between the floor joists, but here, in this corner, it was piled up in a chaotic mound almost 3 feet high. Miller assumed the squatter had just kicked it aside to make room for his nest. Miller poked the pile with his flashlight, intending to flatten it out to check underneath. As the heavy metal flashlight hit the soft pink mound, it didn't hit the floor. It hit something solid, something that yielded slightly but felt firm like a bag of sand. Before Miller could register what he had hit, the pile of insulation exploded upward. A figure erupted from beneath the fiberglass, screaming a guttural, animalistic roar. Clouds of pink dust and glass fibers filled the air, instantly blinding Officer Miller. The man who had been burying himself under the insulation, waiting for the police to leave, lunged at Miller, swinging a rusted hammer. Miller fell backward, his flashlight spinning away into the darkness, creating strobe light effects in the dust-filled attic. "He's here! He's here!" Miller screamed, scrambling back on his elbows, trying to get his service weapon unholstered, but the space was too tight. The roof rafters were too low. He couldn't stand up. He was trapped on his back in a claustrophobic tunnel with a maniac. The attacker swung the hammer down, smashing it into the wooden beam inches from Miller's head. Splinters rained down onto Miller's face. The man raised the hammer again, his face covered in a mask of pink insulation and sweat, eyes wild and bloodshot. Just as the hammer was coming down for a second strike, the second officer, Officer Davis, who had been near the hatch, threw himself across the attic beams, tackling the attacker from the side. The 3 men became a tangle of limbs, fighting in a space that was only 4 feet high, rolling over the wooden joists, punching and grappling in the sweltering heat. Officer Davis managed to get a grip on the attacker's wrist, twisting it violently until the hammer dropped with a heavy thud onto the drywall ceiling below, the ceiling of Tracy's bedroom. The attacker fought with the strength of the insane, biting and clawing, but the 2 officers were trained and adrenaline-fueled. They pinned him face down into the insulation, forcing his hands behind his back. "Stop fighting!" Miller screamed, pressing his knee into the man's back. "Stop fighting or I will tase you!" The man went limp, panting heavily. "She's mine," he wheezed, his voice muffled by the fiberglass. "She can't leave me again." Down on the front lawn, Tracy and the detective heard the crashing sounds from above, the sound of bodies slamming against the wood framing, the yelling, the thud of the hammer. Tracy screamed, stepping back from the house as if it was going to explode. A few minutes later, the radio on the detective's shoulder crackled to life. "We got him, Sarge. He was hiding under the insulation. We're bringing him down." Tracy watched the front door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She expected to see a stranger. She expected to see a homeless drifter, someone random, someone she had never met. But when the officers dragged the handcuffed man out onto the front porch, Tracy fell to her knees in the grass. It wasn't a stranger. Despite the beard he had grown, despite the dirt and the pink fibers coating his skin, she knew exactly who it was. It was Patrick, her ex-boyfriend, the man she had moved 40 miles to escape, the man she thought she had left behind in the city. He hadn't just found her, he had beaten her there. In the interrogation room later that day, the full, terrifying story came out. Patrick hadn't just stumbled upon her house, he had stalked her digitally. He had hacked into her email weeks before she moved, and he saw the lease agreement she had signed with the landlord. He knew the address before she even picked up the keys. Patrick had driven to Rock Hill 3 days before Tracy's move-in date. He had broken into the house through a back window while it was empty, and he had set up camp in the attic. He brought supplies, water, protein bars, and jars. He modified the vents, he learned the layout of the house, and then he waited. When Tracy moved in, carrying her boxes, thinking she was starting a new life, Patrick was already above her, watching her unpack, listening to her hum along to the radio, feeling a twisted sense of ownership. He told police that he considered the attic their apartment. He said he would come down at night while she was sleeping just to stand by her bed and watch her breathe. Sometimes he would touch her hair lightly, not enough to wake her, just enough to satisfy his obsession. The poltergeist activity, the open cabinets, the toilet seat, the soda can, wasn't him trying to scare her, it was him getting comfortable. He admitted that he started getting sloppy. He would come down to get a drink and forget to crush the can or put it in his pocket. He would use the bathroom and forget to put the seat down. In his mind, he lived there too, so why should he hide? The drawing of the woman with the X's over her eyes, that wasn't sloppy, that was anger. He had heard Tracy talking to her dad on the phone, talking about how happy she was to be away from him. That enraged him. The drawing was his way of telling her that her safety was an illusion. Patrick was charged with aggravated stalking, burglary, and resisting arrest. Because of the weapons found in the attic, the hammer and the knife, and his stated intent to never let her leave, prosecutors pushed for a heavy sentence. He is currently serving 15 years in a state penitentiary, and Tracy has a permanent restraining order that covers the entire state of South Carolina. Tracy obviously never spent another night in that house. She moved out that same day, leaving most of her furniture behind. She couldn't bear to touch anything that he might have touched. She moved back in with her parents for a year, undergoing intense therapy to deal with the PTSD. Today, Tracy lives in a high-rise apartment building on the 10th floor. She doesn't have an attic, she doesn't have a crawl space, she has concrete ceilings and 24-hour security in the lobby. But she still checks the vents, she still checks the closets, and she never, ever sleeps without the door locked. This story is a chilling reminder that when we lock our doors at night, we're assuming the threat is on the outside, trying to get in. But sometimes, in the strangest and darkest cases, the threat has been inside with us all along, waiting for the lights to go out. Thank you for listening to the Cypher Story. If you enjoyed this story, please challenge the like button to a staring contest, but use eye drops on yourself right before you start so you have an unfair advantage. Also, please subscribe to the Cypher Story channel on YouTube. We upload new stories of the strange, dark, and mysterious every single day. We're building a community here of people who want to look into the shadows and understand the darker side of human nature. If you have a story about a stalker or a phrogger, someone living in your home without you knowing, please email it to me at the address in the description below. I read every single submission, and your story might be the next one we feature. Until next time, check your attics, check your vents, and stay safe. See ya!